So in Tacoma, one of the interesting things we got to do with the scenes is have characters interact with the world, but the world is in a different state than it was when the characters were interacting with it. So the difference between the world that you're looking at and the world that the characters were inhabiting is hopefully visible via their actions, but not in any other way.
Right.
Yeah. Here in the irrigation room, there's a good example of this where if you're watching Andrew when he's talking to Sarah, there's one point where he is walking across the room and it looks like he's holding something and it happens to be the hose that's on the ground, and you'll see the characters at the beginning walking through the hose, and then later in the scene, once he had hooked up the hose across the room, you'll see the characters step over it. So that's kind of a good example of showing both states.
Yeah, there's some other places where you only see the aftermath, like in medical, the storage room is all messed up and the shelves are knocked down, and that's what happens at the very end of the scene. But yeah, in irrigation here, you actually get to see the before and the after and the during kind of all in one place.
Yeah, the only other one I can think of is the drone, which when it explodes, it gets tilted on its stand, and so everyone's interacting with it in slightly the wrong place.
Right, and Bert is climbing up a ladder that has fallen
has been knocked
onto
over
the floor and stuff like
and
that.
Using controls that are touching things that are now covered by what's that stuff called?
Foam.
Yeah.
Good commentary.
Just say foam again like that.
Oh, foam.
This weird little stone is Andrew's shaping stone that he's been working on. Stone shaping is a sort of meditative practice that we made up.
True.
That you're supposed to basically just take some kind of relatively soft stone in a vaguely spherical chunk and just rub it with your hands so that it slowly is worn down into a smooth shape.
Yeah. Andrew's family kind of brought this meditative practice with them, and then he is carrying it on and lived it and practiced it in his own life.
And that's concretized by the fact that two of the stones up in his office belonged to his grandmother, and that she had actually worked on them for her entire life. Also, we have Andrew's cigarettes here because he's a secret smoker, much like Nat, and smoking normal cigarettes would be an incredibly terrible idea in a space station. You don't want to have an open flame anywhere on a space station where you rely on oxygen to, be there. So we thought smoking was expressive enough that we wanted to have cigarettes anyway, and so we made up a variety of cigarettes that did not actually flame, but
they are self-vaporizing, effectively.
Right.
So I think what we posited was that they had microscopic electric filaments in them, and then when you drew on them with your breath, it would activate those filaments and vaporize part of the cigarette, and that's what you're smoking.
So they heat, but they don't they never cause it to actually catch fire.
So the tea garden at the end of the long hall here in Botany, if you go there, it's one of the few places in the station where it's almost entirely window. Hopefully some people caught it. There's a small and completely serendipitous result, which is when you're actually looking out here and you wait for the other wings to come around, you can see the burst oxygen tanks that are a central plot point. And in fact, you can see those from any place in the game. If you look out the window, they're there from the very first second of the game. But it was just kind of an accident. We built this whole wing, and we were deciding how to align the station in respect to how the wing was lined up. And I did this accidentally and put this right here because I really wanted to look out onto the solar panels of the station. And then I just saw the tanks kind of drift by slowly, so it was pretty cool.
There's a few different specific callbacks to our last game, Gone Home, in Tacoma. We are pretty directly implying that they take place in the same universe because there's a gardening book written by Sam's mom from Gone Home that you can also find here in the Botany Wing. So some of them are pretty direct. But this one that we're near right now...
That's pretty direct also.
It's fairly direct, but it's not like the same object. It's just a mug that says jazz on it.
You think people have jazz mugs in real life?
Well, a lot of people do now. They bought them from Topatico.com.
Son of a gun.
We made it happen. We ruined people's kitchens.
It's true.
But
we don't have this for merchandise.
No.
Don't get excited about that.
As far as... direct Gone Home callbacks go, there's the Janice Greenbrier book, there's the jazz mug, and then there's the Christmas duck that you find in the empty storage bunk in the network technology module.
And it
later
lights
in the game.
up.
That's true. And
Unlike
it plays
Jan's
a little
book.
song for you, yeah.
Or the jazz mug.
True, nothing else
Honestly.
lights up and plays you a little song.
What a ripoff.
The AR game in Andrew's bunk is called Spitfire Returns, which is implied to be a sequel to Super Spitfire that you found in Gone Home, which is the
Itself.
Super Nintendo
Yeah.
version of the kind of vector graphics Spitfire game that is playable in Minerva's Den for BioShock 2. So that's the one thing that actually in a lot of ways carries through the most directly from all three of those titles. The basketball Easter egg, I guess, is something that
God.
we took from System Shock 2 as an homage in Gone Home and then carried forward into Tacoma as well.
We didn't put it in Minerva's Den.
Yeah, there's no basketballs.
We did a bad job. Should have made one.
Sorry, everybody.
I'm not sorry.
I know.
Okay, Odin. Ready? I'm gonna do it this time.
So the propulsion suits are never actually called out in the lore of the game, but the idea behind them is that each crew member has a couple of them in their bunks, and that they're used to sort of traverse the central hub, which is a microgravity environment, unlike the rest of the station. So they have little air jets placed in the fabric of strategic areas, kind of on the arms, the hips, and the legs. And there's little jets that the user move in kind of a controlled way through this giant space. And it also lets us make a uniform for the Tacoma station that we can kind of personalize with a name tag for each crew member. I did a little concept for them. It's just the idea behind them was sort of like a space coverall, something not too glamorous, but it's fun. I got to use ZBrush with it, which is a sort of like a clay sculpting program, and sort of snuck them in everyone's closet. So the propulsion...
So a lot of Tacoma's character dynamics are about trust and who trusts who with what, in what context, all those sorts of things. I think we see a lot of that in the botany module specifically. We see, Evie telling the crew, here's our plan and it's going to work, and then when she's in private with Clive saying, this plan isn't going to work, like, what are you thinking? And then I think that you can kind of contrast how both Andrew and Sarah trust and confide in Odin, but Sarah confides in Odin as, like, a personality, and Andrew confides in Odin with, like, his real worries, right, and saying, what I've said is we should just trust the company and do what they say, and then as soon as I'm alone in a room with Odin, I'm saying, how likely is it really that they're going to come pick us up? How sure should I be about this, even though I'm acting totally sure in front of everybody else?
Yeah, and Andrew doesn't quite treat Odin like a person.
Right.
But, like, yeah, he's at least confident in Odin's ability to not spill his information.
Right. He trusts Odin as a source of information.
Right.
And as, this
as an
thing.
analyst,
This thing that he can acknowledge his own uncertainty in front of, in a way that he wouldn't in front of a human,
right?
In
like
this situation.
That sort of like, your pet doesn't care if you're wearing pants, kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's that.
True.
Andrew doesn't wear his pants in front of Odin. The end.
Andrew isn't wearing pants the entire game,
and you didn't know it.
How could you?
Everybody was cool with it.
So with regards to art direction, when we originally conceived of the station, we were talking about wall colors for each of the wings, and we wanted each wing to be the color of the crew member who lived in it. So, Evie's is purple, so originally the kitchen was as a nice purple color, and the wing you're standing in now in engineering would be orange to match Bert, etc. But 6 colors is a lot of colors. And so in the interest of simplicity, we chose just one central color for each of the 3 wings. And they're not particularly tied to any character. They're just, nice to look at or evoked a nice feeling. So green for personnel, blue for biomed, and an industrialish orange for engineering. Paring things down or opting for simplicity is something that I, as an art person, I found I rarely regret, and especially as it pertains to player flow. The idea of having 6 different colors, I could see how that would get confusing after a while, and so we sort of opted to go the way that we did, and I think that it really helps with regards to landmarking. You know, you realize you're in the same wing, and then you'll traverse to a different wing, and it's a different color, and you know you're in a different area. So I'm glad that we sort of simplified things the way we did.
The reason we made the sync device functionality be so like obscured to the player was because early in development we were having trouble with like progression systems and like keys and locks, and people getting too focused in on locks that we were setting up in the game and sort of ignoring the story to find passwords and stuff. So the sync device was sort of a solution for us to have a gating system, but one that the player didn't feel like they needed to like spend all their time paying attention to, because the idea is that it's like almost like a USB stick where you're downloading stuff, and that's the kind of thing that just takes time and that you don't have to pay attention to, and people generally know that, who use computers know that kind of paradigm. So that was sort of like the original idea for why the sync device is sort of this like obscure thing that's just like downloading away. Why we're not like having you have to keep track of like every single little thing you're doing and how it affects the percentage. Like, it doesn't really matter. It's just about like you exploring space and not having to worry about it.
The hope is that you stand in front of it and you plug the sync device in and you watch it tick slowly to 0.1 and then you're like, oh well,
Yeah.
no, I'm gonna go look at other stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll catch up with you.
Earlier, when you disabled info... and safety protocols.
I have heard your concerns about the financial future of this company. Competition is fierce, and the orbital hospitality landscape is changing every day. We must be bold. We must be forward-thinking. We must make the Venturis Belt project a reality. And my fellow venturers, we are nearly there. The orbital workers' safety legislation that's soon to pass in OSEP Congress will pave the way for full automation of orbital facilities by AI. And with that final barrier toppled, we will reach a new age of orbital travel together.
Opportunity able to meet.
This crossword puzzle is sort of an intense repository of extra world building that we didn't get in anywhere else.
It's true. Well, we have a whiteboard in our office that had a bunch of different kind of like world building universe details that we had decided on at different points in development.
Yeah.
And only some of them were mentioned naturally in like emails or dialogue or whatever. So this crossword was a good place to just sort of jam in a Rosetta Stone of like what else is happening on Earth and in orbit that you don't see on Tacoma. Something that's fun about doing speculative fiction is being able to do weird, obscure universe building stuff, but you also never really want to like foreground that and make it be like, understand every detail of our stupid lore. You have to deal with it. But people that actually really care about this stuff are probably willing to do a fictional crossword puzzle to understand like all of the underpinnings of the year 2088.
I don't know if people can do this crossword puzzle if they don't like actually know the answer.
It's true. I think that one challenge with this was just like fitting the clues and a crossword puzzle onto one page.
Yeah, that was legible.
Right, so you could actually read it when you examined it. And I think that there might be a couple fewer lines on the puzzle than there are clues.
That might be.
So I'm sorry if you can't actually complete this crossword puzzle, but the Venturer magazine doesn't really do careful quality control because they don't care.
They don't care at all.
Sorry, everybody.
Yeah. At one point, I decided to make a variety of beer that was named the same as your small child.
Yes.
It's true.
It was a surprise.
Yeah, did we surprise you with it?
You guys pranked me.
I needed more stuff to put on the packaging because there's always basically infinite things that you have to put on packaging, and I'm like, I can't read that much about your child. What am I gonna do? So I asked Steve for I was like, do you have any good timing quotes, because you're a very quotable person, and so Steve looked up some old tweets of yours, and we kind of put them on the beer cans.
You kind of put them on the beer cans.
Kind of.
So I think we should set up the one detail that's missing here. That's very important to me. I didn't know.
Yeah.
I mean, that's important, right? I had no idea. So that's why it's a prank. It's not a prank that it's my daughter's name. The real prank
it's all a prank.
Here's your goofy words.
God, they're so good though.
On a can.
We're in mechanical engineering, which is Bert's zone. One of the big considerations when we were working on designing each level in Tacoma, each wing, was how does the player sort of encounter each room and in what order? For example, we have most of the bunks be kind of like tucked away in the back of each wing, usually with sort of an entryway or a longer hallway that kind of separates it from the main working areas.
We did a lot of tricks. For a time, there was even kind of this idea of an airlock where there were 2 doors that you had to go through to get to everybody's bedroom. And then you can see in back, there's an example of an elevation change. We tried as much to make them feel like they were lower or higher than the rest of the space. So you kind of had to go upstairs to get to the bedroom.
And that was so that, we could have these working spaces where we would imagine, Bert would come out and, do her mechanical engineering work during the day, and then going home for her, she at least has this sort of, separation of work and personal space, and not just be, living in your office.
Right.
So, yeah, each wing is sort of designed to have the working spaces be accessible in an order that makes sense, and to have the bunks in the back to give characters a sense of personal space.
So the bounce sliding is specifically referring to the idea that when the sun comes through in some spaces and hits certain surfaces, we try to make it look like the whole room changes temperature and sometimes warms up. Most rooms that have a large pool of sunlight that moves through actually has a floating point light that's just sitting there. And that point light is one color, and it is on a timer that is linked to the angle of the sun, and when the angle of the sun hits X or Y, it warms up or cools down. And for me, and I don't know if this hit you as well, but it made it feel a lot like a plane for me when I'm in a plane and the plane banks or the sun setting or something has changed in the plane and the light starts coming through in a different way and you see it like go across the ceiling and then the room temperature changes and it becomes, a little golden and a little orange.
Yeah.
And it's just this, you can be, watching a movie in the back of a seat at a plane and then suddenly you're like, oh, I'm flying through the air.
Yeah, I think it's lovely. I think it's a really nice effect.
Something that players with a keen eye for game development history might notice when they're playing Tacoma is the presence of a character named Roberta Williams. That's Bert's full name. And people have asked, is that a reference to Roberta Williams, the creator of King's Quest and co-founder of Sierra Online? And the answer is yeah, of course it is. I tend to enjoy when occasionally in fiction there's a fictional character that quote unquote just happens to have the same name as a real world historical figure or famous person or whatever, like Sheriff Harry S. Truman in Twin Peaks or something like that. And so I kind of wanted to do that. And also, Roberta Williams as a figure in the industry was a really influential person in both her work as a game designer and writer, and one of the very, very first originators of the graphical adventure game with the King's Quest series. And so anyway, we see, I think, what we do with games like Tacoma as kind of having one foot in traditional adventure games and one foot in immersive sim influenced, games that come from the Looking Glass tradition of games like Thief and System Shock. Being able to put, a little bit of an homage and a tip of the hat to Roberta Williams in the game and kind of acknowledge, I think, the reverberations that her work have had even on, stuff that we're doing now was a cool opportunity to have. In Tacoma, one of the things that we wanted to acknowledge was to have some evidence of how geopolitical changes had happened over time. And so, when you look at, for instance, the flags over Bert's workstation, or when you look at the crew IDs that you can find all throughout the station, the parts of the world that people hail from are not one-to-one with countries or city-states or nation-states necessarily that exist in those forms today. We, I think, only know as much about our fictional universe as we need to, which in many cases is more than we put into the game and more than a player could know just from playing it, but it's also only as much as we need to know.
Because we only know where the story touches.
We know enough to know what we can refer back to in the text.
Right.
I think that we know that the DEC exists because we knew that Andrew was from New York, and we needed a region name for where New York is now. But we don't have a ton of knowledge about what's going on in parts of the world that the game doesn't touch. But hopefully there's still enough of territory surrounding what you actually see in the game that the player kind of gets glimpses of, that you get a feeling of sort of cohesive external
richness
world.
Yeah.
All right.
I like Nat and Bert's bunk. We tried to make each bunk feel very different from the rest. They all have a different footprint. They all have a different, color and aesthetic to them, as best as we could do. But I think that Nat and Bert's bunk might be one of the more successful. They have sort of a high number of unique assets, like the weird floppy gel animal. They have the mouth guard, and mouth guard is directly modeled on my own mouth guard. I was holding it in my hand as I sculpted it. So in a way, those are my teeth in the game. They also have the sex toys. There's the vibrator and the rope. Just the mural on the wall is kind of interesting. So I think, it's one of the more interesting bunks to visit. Nat and Bert's bunk, I give it 5 stars.
We are going to talk about filled animals, which there is one of in Tacoma.
And it's like a stuffed animal, but filled with gel?
Right, yeah, it's stuffed with gel.
It's filled, even.
It's filled and stuffed simultaneously.
It's gross. Well, I just know that they weren't going to make it for a long, long time. Like, they just weren't in the game. And finally, they came in hot, like at the very end. Like, we were like, well, we have the model. Like, I'd modeled it at some point, and Noel had rigged it.
Because of all the joints and the wiggliness of the legs, I think it was an interesting time to try to make it behave in a way that was the appropriate amount of terrible.
So yeah, I guess filled animals happened because of our love for plushies and just being jokesters. I think many things in Tacoma came from office jokes and then became serious.
Serious in quotes.
Bert, in fact, is engaged with decorating their room in the AR fragment that's here. It's kind of an externalization of Bert's desire for something else. Bert's desire to kind of branch off from what she's been trained to do as a mechanical engineer and be able to kind of follow her passion of doing art and being an artist.
Yeah. Or at the very least, her interest. But yeah,
right.
It's not really encouraged by Venturas.
Right. But the painting that she's doing is a painting called Luna, that I think is from like sort of the 19th century kind of like pre-Raphaelite school. And we thought it was on theme, being like a lady on a moon.
Yeah,
that's
cute.
Bert is very sweet, but her idea was a little on the nose, but that's okay.
I mean, Clive's music is a little on the nose. It's fine.
It's true. We can blame our characters on how corny we are.
That's exactly what we should do. Yes, you're right.
The drone bay, the bones of it, are based on this wonderful piece of concept art we have by Rebecca Mock, who has long been one of my favorite illustrators. So I wasn't able really to hit all of the details here in our concept art for the final room, but I think, we managed to get the broad strokes of it. And some of the assets, like the door up at the top, we had to reuse from previous versions of the station or previous areas in the station. But I think it turned out pretty cool and pretty dramatic, and I like this room a lot because it feels like a stage in how theatrical it is, how like it has a central focus of the drone itself and the raised areas and basically like actors. And it was one of the final rooms I think to actually come together. But yeah, drone room, I really like it.
There's this scene in the drone bay between Nat and Bert where the two of them are in this terrible accident together and they're both injured. And this is something where, when we arrived at this being one of the scenes in the game, I kind of naturally had to draw from an experience I had where my wife and I were in a motorbike accident. And, that was a really traumatic, scary experience for me. Yeah, I think probably the hardest part of that to relive or draw from is, there's the part in that scene where Bert is thrown off the ladder and hits her head and is knocked out, and Nat also falls down the ramp, but then she turns and just sees Bert lying there and calls out to her and doesn't get any response. And, I have a very vivid memory. In our accident, a car ran a red light and went right in front of us, and the motorbike went straight into the side of the car. And I was thrown into the intersection, and Rachel just hit the side of the car and ended up basically right where the accident happened. And so, I was thrown probably a couple dozen feet and ended up in the middle of the intersection. And, first I saw that my leg was broken, and I was like, I probably shouldn't look at that anymore. And then I looked over and saw Rachel lying there with her back to me, just like in the fetal position on the ground, just not moving. And, I called out to her, and I didn't know if she was alive or not. And that's a crazy position to be in. And that's the position that Nat was in. It's just like, I see you lying there. I don't know what's happened to you. And I can't. Because the kind of unbearable moment in that scene where Nat is just dragging herself across the floor to Bert is something that I didn't do because I started to, and then people ran up to me and were like, stop, okay, I'm gonna go check on her, you stay here, right? But that moment of uncertainty when somebody you care about is clearly injured and you don't know how bad. It was a crazy thing to live through, and I'm glad that for us it worked out because we're both pretty much fine now. It was one of those things where when I realized I was writing this scene, I kind of knew some of the things that had to go into it, but it doesn't always make it that easy to actually have to live back through to put it into the game.